Everyone, welcome back from your break. Let's go ahead and take a look at what we are going to focus on for the rest of the semester. There's not a lot of week left. So uh, on the 8th, you'll have module 11, termination due. You have the study plan and the assessment. That's this week. And then going forward, we have on the 15th, module 12, rights and responsibilities. We have the study plan and the assessment that is due there. And then two more modules after that, 14 and 17, with both the study plans and assessments. Written assignment in, module 14, and the discussion board in module 17, and then your final exam. Let's take a look at module 12, one of my favorite modules, employee rights and responsibilities. So up to this point, we've really learned about the employer side of things, the business side of things. We know that there are a lot of different laws. There's over 300 different laws that pertain to employees in the workplace. Whether it's from the Department of Labor or the EEOC or even safety, OSHA. We'll learn about those in next week or in a couple weeks. First, I didn't know if most of you are aware that not only do the employers have certain laws that they have to follow, employees have rights and responsibilities. So we're going to take a look at some of those rights and responsibilities. So there are three different areas we're going to focus in module 12. Some of the laws that relate to your rights, your individual rights. You'll learn about those. And then we'll also talk a little bit about the employee-employer relationship. And then last, any disciplinary factors or guidelines. So let's hop right into some laws that protect you as an employee. So first off, you're going to learn a little bit about the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Basically, this says that your credit, unless there's a specific reason, this act basically says your credit shouldn't be a factor in determining your employment. Let's talk a little bit about drug-free workplace. So drug-free workplace, this act requires that all businesses follow federal law when it comes to providing a safe and drug-free workplace. And so this is why some employers have drug screenings, random drug tests throughout your employment. They are required to make sure that they're offering a safe and drug-free workplace. And so that means that you might be subjected to a test in your employment. I know I have in my lifetime. They were more popular in the 90s and early 2000s. I think some employees have gone away from them unless there is reason to suspect or drug use work. But for the most part, I think recently, I don't remember having to have a drug test in the last, I don't know, 10 years. It's just required for the jobs that I've had, but I do remember early on in the 90s, and I'm dating myself here, in the 90s and the 2000s, taking them quite often. Anytime I started a new job and then randomly throughout my employment. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the Act. So there's the Privacy Act that requires employees should have access to their personnel file at any time. You're allowed to see what's in your personnel file. Also, there's polygraph tests. This is interesting. So polygraphs are illegal to use. Prohibits employers from using them to determine employment or employment screening. Now, say that there might be some sort of entity out there that does not fall under the Polygraph Protection Act. Sure, really sure. At one point, I think the FBI and CIA might have used polygraphs. They still might be able to have that exception because of the line of work they do. But if you're just going down the road to the local business trying to get a job, they cannot use a polygraph. Just letting you know. Social media use, employee social media use. I think by now we all know that what you say on social media can have a negative impact with your employment. I know, 10 or 15 years ago when social media first came out, there was a lot of, I'm not sure, backlash is the right word, but basically saying, hey, we have the right to free speech and we should be able to say what we want and when we want. And no one's really disagreeing with that. But here's the thing, because there are certain laws, such as the drug policy, the federal law on drug. Also, the EEOC has a lot of different laws on discrimination, Title VII, for instance. So if an employee says something illegal on social media in the workplace, meaning something discriminatory, um, it's illegal for them to say that on social media. However, it's not legal for them to be able to say that in the workplace. And because those lines are blurred and because it's public, there has been a lot of times where someone might have said something egregious or discriminatory on social media, and it affected their employment, whether they got written up for that or even terminated, depending on how egregious that was. Um, and again, no one's, it's a fine line here because no one's, saying that you don't have the right to those opinions. However, there are laws that employers have to, especially when it comes to discrimination, and providing a harassment-free work environment, discriminatory-free work environment, since that is required. And if an employee decides to say some egregious things on social media, that employer would be held responsible for a harassing work environment if they didn't do something about it. And so that's why you're seeing sometimes if someone posts something really egregious on social media, they get fired from their job. That is why. Same thing with employer behavior work. Side works. Read about that in the module. Let's go ahead and talk about will employment. So there's a thing called at-will employment. And most of the states in this country follow the at-will doctrine. And basically what that says is that the relationship that you have, the employee-employer relationship, is one of will, meaning the employee is not forced into taking that job, and the employer is not forced into hiring that person. So what to do is I like to think of the employee-employer relationship as one, like any relationship, whether it's a friendship or a significant other, we'll just call it a relationship. Helpful to that in today's world, you are able to join friendships or relationships from your own free, that you want to be friends with someone or you want to have that significant other in your life, right? And so you have your own free will and you enter that relationship, and hopefully it goes well and hopefully that relationship lasts forever. It's amazing and it's fulfilling. Yay. However, we all know that sometimes those relationships don't last. I know I have friends that I'm no longer friends with, or I had, friendships in the past that I no longer have in my life for various reasons. Exes as well, like ex-boyfriends, those type of things. Because as you experience life, you realize what's important and what's not important. And so I don't want to get into a personal relationship discussion here, but there is a bridge to where I'm going. You have to think about the employee-employer relationship. One of those relationships. You are allowed to enter into employment if you want to. You shouldn't be forced into that employment. You might feel obligated to. Feel like you have to get a job to put food on the table. And it's not one that's really fulfilling, but you have to do it because you have to do it, right? Hopefully, you find the employer that fulfills not only what you want financially, but also personally and fulfilling as well. And so that would be the best case scenario. Because of this, because there's this at-will employment doctrine that basically says an employee can leave a job at any time. There's no contracts implied when it comes to at-will employment. So you go to work, and hopefully when you go to work and you realize that this job is not for you, you hate it, it's awful, your boss is awful, because there's an at-will doctrine that protects you, you can go ahead and leave anytime you want. Same thing from the employer when they hire someone and they realize that that person isn't working out, they have the right. They have the they have the right to go ahead and terminate that person. So let's talk a little bit about the actual definition. So I kind of rambled on. Let me go ahead and focus back in. So at-will employment. That basically means that protects both the employer and the employee. And from the employer side, it means that the employer has the right to terminate an employee at any time. They can do it for a good reason, a bad reason, for no reason at all, as long as it's not illegal. So as long as they're not firing you for being one of the protected classes under Title VII, or age or pregnancy, disability, anything that's protected under the EEOC laws, as long as they're not discriminating you for anything outside of that, it's absolutely legal. If you're in a relationship with someone and you're not feeling it anymore. There's no good reason, there's no bad reason. I'm just, I'm over it. You should be able to leave that relationship, right? Same thing with an employer. They should be able to leave the relationship with a bad employee. I always try to put the perspective. Let's say you own a business, whether it's a small business or a business, and you're literally paying people out of your own pockets to employ them. And you hire someone, you think they're going to be a great fit, and then it turns out about 6 months later that they're not a good person. Uh, they have work ethic, they have an attitude, lazy, doing, horrible work, but they're just not what you wanted from an employee. If you are the one paying them out of your pocket, you should be the one that is also allowed to fire them at any time as long as it's not illegal. Right? And so this is an implied doctrine at any of your at-will states. And there's, I think, 36 of them. No, I think it's more than that. I think there's only 2 or 3 that have something a little bit more defined when it comes to will employment. Now, I've never worked in a state that wasn't will. So I've lived in a lot of different states. I would say the majority of states are well employment. I think say there's one out west. There's maybe 2 of them that are not, but again, not definitely not on the East Coast. All of that are there's some things in just cause. Um, and it can be modified by a contract. So for just cause, but we don't have a lot of contracts in the state. When you get hired, you go to the handbook, they will tell you up front that this is an at-will employment. They follow at-will. This is not a contract, that we can terminate you at any time. But on the flip side, as an employee, you're allowed to leave a relationship at any time. So if you feel as though it's not a good fit for you. So there are a couple of exceptions to at-will employment. Public policy exception. If there was an implied contract, even though you didn't technically sign the contract, but if there was one that was applied, you can prove that it was applied, that's an exception to that will. Now, contract's a little bit different. Obviously, there are very few employers in the state of North Carolina that can actually provide a contract. So when I think of an employment contract, I often think of professional athletes. And so I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. They sign $1 million contract deals. If the team lets them go, typically they keep the money on their contract unless it's specifically written. Again, there are not a lot of contracts in the state of North Carolina just because we're an at-will state. Last but not least, let's talk a little bit about the purpose of discipline. No, there's a law that says an employer can terminate an employee at any time, a good reason, a bad reason, or no reason at all, as long as it's not illegal. There are things that I always recommend businesses do to prove that the action of termination was not illegal, meaning you weren't fired for being a woman or having a certain religion or a certain age or a certain race or color. As long as you can prove that the person was not meeting their end of the bargain when it comes to employment. And this is where we talk about discipline and progressive discipline and then documentation. You always want to document. Technically, an employer doesn't have to document. They can fire you for any reason. But I always recommend that there's documentation and progressive discipline. So that way, if the person decides to file a claim against an employer, you can prove that there was a just cause there. It wasn't because of their gender or their race or anything else. It was because they weren't fulfilling their end of the bargain when it comes to employment. So because of that, we have a lot of companies have make sure that they're following the EEOC laws. Then different different policies when it comes to discipline. They might have what's known as a progressive discipline. So it might start with a verbal warning, a written warning, a suspension, and then termination. And so if you can go ahead and document that this has taken place, say someone's not showing up to work on time, is that I've actually was at a call center. I worked at a call center years ago, and one of the things that we had a big issue with was people showing up to work on time or showing up to work at all. This is the first time we would give them a verbal warning, and we would actually document the verbal warning. I know it's really confusing. Like, we're talking about verbal warning. Can you sign the fact that we give you a verbal warning for not showing up? And that, well, this isn't a verbal warning if I'm signing it. If it's written out, like, yeah, I know, but we're just documenting that we gave that verbal warning to you. And then we would move on to a written warning, and then we would write from termination. We didn't have a suspension, which is part of the policy. So you got a verbal warning, a written warning, and then after that, termination. And it was all documented, clearly documented. So that way, if an employee decides to file suit, we have it documented that they didn't show up to work and they wouldn't show up to work on time. And our business relied on certain having people on the phones. Well, again, a verbal warning is just usually the first step. It's an unofficial, typically unofficial, but they always recommend that you document it. And you don't have to have the employee sign, but definitely document it in the personal file, the written warning, and then eventually suspension or termination. And it's what's known as progressive discipline because it gets progressively worse. So I think you find this this module very interesting. You'll see from hopefully you have a different perspective on what the employer goes through, all the different things that they have to follow, all the different obligations that they're trying to provide a safe and drug-free workplace. So it's not just the employer being difficult, but they're trying to protect everyone in the workplace. And then same thing for you as an employee, your rights are and what the responsibilities are from your end as well. Thank you very much. Great week, and reach out with any questions.